Ishiro Honda once said that the tragedy of monsters is the fact that they are born too tall, too strong, and too heavy. And at least in the context of the films, he was right. These attributes have led to Godzilla having many disagreements with the Japanese military. But at least in the context of pop culture, these attributes have led to the opposite for Godzilla. They've allowed him to prosper and produce 28 movies. But I want to analyze this and discover what it truly is about Godzilla that attracts people to him and why he's been so endearing. And the only way to truly do that successfully is to review every Godzilla movie ever made.
Some people might be angry, but regardless, welcome to Zazubaar's Godzilla Palooza.
What's up, Advertising Department of Pacific Pharmaceuticals? I am Zazubaar, and welcome back to Godzilla Palooza. It's day 4, and today we're going to be getting into the big guns. Not that Gojira and Raids Again weren't big guns, but today we're going to get the big guns of my early life as a Godzilla fan. Yes, indeed, today we're going to be reviewing the movie that basically changed my life. The movie that set me on the path to doing what I'm doing at this very moment. The movie that will be very difficult to review, but I'm going to try and do it anyway. Today, my friends, we are going to be reviewing both the English and Japanese cuts of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Yes, indeed, the movie that defined my childhood. So, just to get the nostalgia factor out of the way, there is no way in hell I'm going to be able to review these things objectively. I've got news for you guys. If you're looking for an objective, this is what's wrong with this movie, this is what works with the movie kind of review, it's going to be that, but I can't be that objective with this movie because it really did change my life and define my childhood. So I can't give it that low of a score since it has such a special place in my heart. So I'm just warning you guys right now, there's going to be a lot of, oh my god, I love that scene from when I was a kid, kind of moments in this review, but I'm going to really try hard to review this movie objectively and literally try to tell you guys what's actually wrong with it, because guess what? There's a lot. So that's the little nostalgia factor. I saw this movie when I was, I think, 3 years old. It could have been later than that, but I don't think it was much later. And my mom showed it to me for the first time. I've told this story before on my channel, but just because I want this series to stand on its own, I'll tell it in a summarized version. Basically, my mom bought me the VHS tape of King Kong vs. Godzilla back in 1997. I watched it, fell in love with it, watched it over and over again, and tried to see all the Godzilla films I could get my hands on. And it definitely put me on the path to becoming a filmmaker and becoming somewhat interested in the film and entertainment industry. Like, this is the movie that put me on the path I'm on right now. So I owe it a lot for that. But more than that, and more specific to this review series, this is the thing that got me into Godzilla. This is the movie that got me into the character. So I want to talk about that in this review of what this movie does for defining what will become the status quo Godzilla characteristics, because as I said with Gojira and Raids Again, Godzilla doesn't really get much of a characterization outside of being a destructive force of nature. And not that he isn't that way in King Kong vs. Godzilla, but he starts to become more of what we'll know as Godzilla, especially in the Showa series. So this movie is important for that. the other reason this movie is important, this doesn't really have anything to do with nostalgia, but this is just why it's important in Godzilla history. This remains to be the highest grossing Godzilla film to date. I'm not exactly sure on the exact figures. I probably should have looked it up, but I'm lazy, so I didn't. But yes, this movie remains to be the highest grossing film of all, highest grossing Godzilla film of all the whole series. And I think the big reason for that is who he's fighting. I mean, you just can't go wrong with having Godzilla fight King Kong. Two giant monster icons clashing in one film, which is also why this movie is important, but that's the reason why it sold. It was such a brilliant idea, and thus we have a really popular Godzilla film. And it remains to be one that's fondly looked back on by most people. There are some people who deeply criticize it, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So this film is important for two other big reasons. One is that this is the first time Godzilla is going to appear in color, and this will define the rest of the series. This film is shot in a new, well, not a new kind of film, but one of Toho's specialties called Toho Scope, which is basically a wider lens. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's a particular kind of way of shooting a movie that was specific to Toho. And the first movie they shot it in was The Mysterians. And they used it for some of their movies ever since. I don't think it was all their movies, but they used it for quite a few, especially early Godzilla films. But this is the first Godzilla film shot in Toho Scope. And damn, does it look beautiful, but we'll get into that. So it's important for that as well. Again, it's also, the first time Godzilla shows up in color. But it's also the first time King Kong shows up in color. Kong only had two official movies before this. We had the original King Kong, and we had its sequel, Son of Kong. And we hadn't had anything else with the official things with the character since then. There were a couple of not knockoffs, but unofficial Kong films made in Japan in the 1930s and 50s. So, no, I think it was just the 30s. But there were unofficial Kong films made in America made in Japan to try and capitalize on the success of the RKO film. So there's a bunch of other Kong films, but there were only two official made by the people who created the character films before King Kong vs. Godzilla. So it's important for bringing that character back, and it's important for also kind of bringing back Godzilla. It had been a while since there had been a Godzilla film. This film came out in 1962 in both Japan and in America, and Japan hadn't had a Godzilla film since 1955 with Godzilla Raids Again, and with America it's complicated because in 1956 they had King of the Monsters, and then in 1959 they had Gigantus the Fire Monster, which Gigantus isn't technically a Godzilla film, but if you're not stupid, I think most people assumed that looks just like Godzilla, but whatever. So their last Godzilla film was only 3 years before King Kong vs. Godzilla came out, but still, it's a gap. And it was an even bigger gap in Japan. It was 7 years, so it was a comeback for Godzilla as well. And strangely enough, this is both monsters' third film, so interesting thing there. The other reason I want to get into about why this movie is important in Godzilla's history is because this is basically a reunion of the old production team of Gojira. Basically, the only one who doesn't return who is an integral member of Gojira is Shigeru Kayama, but believe me, the way this story is written, it's not Kayama stuff, believe me. Otherwise, I think everyone else returns. We've got Honda back as director. We'll get to him. Toyuki Tanaka is still producing. He'll be producing all the Godzilla films up until Godzilla vs. Destroya, so I'm not going to say that again. Like I said with Sabraya last review, I'm not going to say Tanaka produced this in every review because he does every single movie until we get to Destroya. So I'm not going to say that in every review unless it's integral. So that's there. So Tanaka's still here. If Akube's back, thank God. Well, depending on your viewpoint, we'll get to him in a little bit as well. So if Akube's back with his incredible music talent, we've got Sabraya still doing the special effects, and damn are they awesome. And of course Hiro Nakajima is still Godzilla, so a bunch of people returning, but again, we've got a little bit of a reunion between the old Gojira production team, so it's cool there. So I will get into Honda and mainly Honda and Ifukube a little later because this film has problems with them being behind it. We'll get to them. Otherwise, everyone else is kind of doing their usual thing. Zazubaar is still doing brilliant work, but we'll talk about the effects in this film a little later. Right now, let's get into the plot. So right now, we're going to be reviewing the original Japanese cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla. Now, let me just say, this film is not available in America, so I bet a bunch of you haven't seen it. So I'm going to try and be as specific as I can with the plot, but I'm sure most of you have seen the American cut, and we'll be reviewing that separately in part 2 of this review, but it is a very similar plot, so we'll go into as much detail as what's changed. The only thing that's really cut out from the American version that might throw you off if you don't know, if you haven't seen the Japanese cut, is the lack of the scenes with the news broadcaster Eric Carter. Otherwise, some of the scenes are just rearranged, which we'll get to the editing in a little bit, but basically what happens is two major stories are going on at the same time. One is a advertising department of Tokyo Television making an expedition to an island called Faroe Island because they want to capture the apparent giant monster god of that island to be used in their advertising campaigns. And basically use that god monster to advertise this new medicine that the company is producing based on berries found on the island where the god is, Faroe Island. So basically, they're assembling an expedition team to go there. Also, the expedition itself is kind of a publicity stunt to get people into the corporation, because they're having a really hard time with advertising. So that's what the opening of the film is. But the second story going on is of an American nuclear submarine called the Seahawk, doing some exploring in the Arctic. I don't think it's the Arctic Ocean, but it's the northern Pacific Ocean. And they don't really say what exactly they're looking for. I think it's just a science, like a science expedition or whatever. I think they're studying radiation up there, which is ultimately the cause of their destruction. Basically, they crash into an iceberg, and the iceberg is the same iceberg from Godzilla Raids Again, which encased the sleeping Godzilla. So Godzilla is waken up by the reactors of the sub, and is, of course, on the loose again. And Godzilla invades Japan and fights the military briefly on an island military base, and destroys it. They have no chance, and then he moves on to the mainland. Though he does disappear for a little while, while we pick up the King Kong story. And people are talking about how they don't know where Godzilla is, and they're all freaking out. One thing I like about this movie right off the bat is that Godzilla being back is a big deal. I like how that's made a big deal. Like, we'll get to some films where him being large again isn't really brought to the surface as it should be if they're going for a realistic tone. But in this film, it's there, so I commend it for that. Again, we pick up the King Kong story with the expedition arriving on Faroe Island and running into the natives of Faroe Island who worship the god that they're looking for. However, they start to get skeptical when the natives start praying to lightning, and they think the expedition team is made up of mainly 3 people. Our lead male character, Sakurai, his friend whose name escapes me, but I love him, and then their translator whose name also escapes me. I think his name is Kono? I'm not sure. But it's basically 3 people. And then, of course, all the natives. And Sakurai is totally skeptical of the thing. He's just doing it for the money. He's just doing this for a paycheck. And doesn't really believe in the legends of this god. He gets even more skeptical when the natives start praying to the lightning. Then all of a sudden, something aside from thunder and lightning crackles. A giant, monstrous, guttural roar tears through Faroe Island, and Sakurai starts to get a little less skeptical of this thing. They do some exploring, and some strange things happen on the expedition into the jungle. Basically a mountain fall. There's some clunky editing where it looks like a mountain falls, and they hear that same guttural roar, and all the natives look terrified, and Sakurai and the expedition run back to camp. That night on Faroe Island, a giant octopus, of all things, attacks the native village, and there's a big confrontation with the octopus. All the natives and the expedition try to thwart it and send it back to the sea, but they can't seem to do it. Nothing they throw at it seems to have any effect. And then, all of a sudden, something comes bursting through the walls, and it's none other than King Kong. King Kong bursts through this makeshift wall the natives had built alongside their village, I guess to keep him out. It doesn't look like it would have done any good, but it's there. And fights the giant octopus and sends it packing into the ocean. And then Kong, for some reason, drinks the red berry juice that was being brought back to Japan to be marketed, as medicine, because it has some kind of a narcotic effect on animals and people that drink it. So it's basically drugs, but whatever, it's medicine. So Kong drinks it for some reason of his own fruition. I don't know why, and he falls asleep. And the natives have this big, huge dance number. It's weird. Believe me, if you watch the movie, you'll know what I mean. Both cuts have this scene unadulterated, so it's weird in both cuts. Then Sakurai and the expedition team say that they're going to bring Kong back to this is the thing they came to look for, so they're going to bring him back to Japan. But along the way on the raft, they get some radio broadcasting coming in that Godzilla is attacking Hokkaido, and he destroys a train there. He's basically on march towards Tokyo, because everything's got to come down to Tokyo, right? So Godzilla heads towards Tokyo. He tramps through Hokkaido, and the military still does not know exactly what they're going to do to fight him yet. Having a hard time remembering exact scenes, because it's a little different than the American cut. And I have to say this is the first time I've ever watched the Japanese cut, because, again, it's not available in America legally. So I had to watch it in another way, and this was my first experience watching it. I'll talk about how I felt about it in a few minutes. But basically, Godzilla goes through Hokkaido, and Kong is so while Godzilla's doing that, Kong on the raft starts to get starts to wake up basically, and starts to be fussy on the raft. So, in an attempt to avoid dying, I guess, the people in the boat, scared of Kong, try to blow the raft up with dynamite that they placed on the raft, and with gunfire, because the actual explosive handle that they were trying to use doesn't work, and they try to blow up the raft with bullets, and that works. Well, it blows up the raft at least, doesn't kill Kong, but Kong is now extremely pissed and is now all wet, and he goes to the mainland of Japan. He swims there. Because I guess that's the closest landmass. They never really exactly say how close they are to Japan yet, so whatever, we'll buy that he can swim there. Hell, at the end of the film, he swims all the way back to Faroe Island from Japan, so I'll buy that. So Kong goes ashore, and not very much later, Godzilla and him just go on a beeline straight for each other. It's never really explained why, but basically there's just some speculation that they're kind of natural enemies. So Kong and Godzilla go on a beeline right for each other. And there's not much of a fight that happens. It's more of Godzilla scaring the ever-living shit out of Kong. Kong is very much so, I'm not exactly how I should describe him. He's basically unnerved by Godzilla's atomic breath and basically his appearance. It's nothing found in nature. So Kong kind of walks away really confused at what the hell he just fought. So Godzilla scares him off with his atomic blast. Godzilla roars triumphantly, and then Godzilla makes a beeline right for Tokyo. But the Japanese government has come up with a familiar plan to... They tried one more thing before that. I'm sorry, I really apologize for this disorganized plot summary, but again, this was the first time I ever watched the film, and I'm used to the American cut, and it's edited differently, so... I think Godzilla... They deploy a trap against Godzilla, basically, that has him being buried in dirt, and then they blow up the undergirth of the dirt. I don't really know how to describe it. Basically, they basically knock Godzilla down into a hole, and then they have explosives inside the hole which blow up, and it's supposed to kill him. I don't know why they think this is going to work, but they try it anyway. Of course, it doesn't work. So then they go to the final line of defense, as it's called. They employ a very familiar tactic. They basically set up a whole mess of high-tension wires around Tokyo, like they've never done that before, and try to keep Godzilla out of the city. And somehow it works. Godzilla is shied away by the electricity. What the hell? We'll get to that in a minute. So Godzilla goes away, basically. he's basically just like, oh crap, I couldn't get through, I'm going to go somewhere else. So he basically goes off and sulks, while King Kong comes running through the suburbs of Tokyo and has no problems busting through the high-tension wires, and is actually energized by the electricity. The radioactive monster was thwarted by the electricity, whereas the actual, just giant gorilla used it to get stronger. We'll get to that in a minute. Kong attacks Tokyo, and Kong attacks a train and picks up the main female lead of the film named Fumi, and basically she is the brother of Sakurai and is the I don't think they're husband and wife, basically fiance or girlfriend or whatever of one of Sakurai's friends whose name also escapes me. So she's picked up by Kong. Kong climbs on top of the Japanese Diet building, and the military has him surrounded, and because they can't shoot at Kong because he's got a girl in his hand, they decide to instead use the red berry juice deployed in gas form to knock Kong out. This works, of course. Fumi is rescued. We never see from her. We never hear from her again. So weird. And Kong is basically, they don't know what to do with the sleeping Kong. But then the Prime Minister comes up with an idea to basically attack. No, wait, the Prime Minister doesn't come up with this idea. Well, he comes up with the premise for the idea. He comes up with basically, let's just get the two to fight and have them kill each other. So, then Sakurai comes up with an idea of using the wires that Fumi's fiance using this thread that Fumi's fiance created. That's basically lightweight steel to attach Kong to not weather balloons, but basically hot air balloons, and basically fly him to Godzilla, basically who's up near Mount Fuji. And they want to fly Kong there, have them fight. Hopefully they'll both kill each other, and then we'll have a nice ending with no more monsters. So they deploy the plan. They wrap Kong up and attach him to a bunch of balloons, and they fly him over to Mount Fuji. Sakurai and Fumi's fiance are both in the helicopter that's alongside Kong, and they end up at Mount Fuji, where, of course, Godzilla seems to be just waiting. I don't know why he's just standing there. I guess he's just sulking from not being able to get into Tokyo. So Kong is dropped, rams into Godzilla. Godzilla falls down, tail overhead, and Kong, being unnerved before by Godzilla's power, runs away from Godzilla at first and hides in a cave. Godzilla, being basically like, what the hell, gets up, goes to look for Kong, and then our fight is underway. I don't want to outline the details of the fight till later, so they fight, and it's fucking spectacular. I know not everyone is going to agree with that, but it's a good fight. So they fight for about, I think it's 12 minutes. I know the exact runtime, but it's edited differently in the Japanese version, so I think it's around 12 minutes. Godzilla and Kong end up in what looks like Osaka, but I'm not sure. I can only tell just because of the building that's there. Basically, they end up near water, and they destroy a castle of some sort, and then Kong rams into Godzilla, and they both fall into the sea. And after a couple minutes of tension, Kong emerges seemingly victorious, and Godzilla is nowhere to be seen. And Kong swims off back to his island, and there's a very optimistic ending. And there's some bogus, like, environmental message said by all people, but the guy who played Dr. Serizawa, Akihiko Hirata, playing I think he's the Secretary of Defense. I might be wrong on that, but he plays basically some important government figure. And he basically just talks about how we can learn from plants and animals. It's just weird. It doesn't, nothing in the film supports it, so it's not like it's an allegory. It just seems to be thrown in there so the film can seem more important than it is. And Kong swims off, so we have a happy ending. Okay, so there's a lot to cover here. This review is already almost a half hour long, so I'm warning you guys, this is going to be a long review. So basically, the thing we want to talk about first is that this is the definitive monster battle structure. Yesterday I talked about with Godzilla Raids Again that it's not that way, that It's a weird structure in that Godzilla fought Anguirus in the films, in the middle of the film, in the second act. And then there was a whole other act to go where it's just Godzilla. That's weird and strangely put together. This structure, with the two having a big fight in the end and one small fight near the end of the second act, is definitely a classic structure, and it's going to be used by all other kaiju battle films to follow. And it's just a really classic structure by having the two monsters have their own individual stories that both collide with each other. And it works with this the tone of the film being that these two huge giants are going to collide, and it's going to be spectacular. And it definitely works in that regard. I love the build-up to it. All the scenes of the humans are, regardless of how stupid and pointless they appropriately build up the fight. There's some great lines that are, again, definitely silly, but they work for the film, where they're talking about who's stronger, Kong or Godzilla, and how everyone would like to see the two fight to see who wins. They're talking about how there are bets made. I'm like, I really think that's cool. Again, it builds up the fight, and this is before the two even meet each other. Then they meet. Everyone who was rooting for Kong definitely is unnerved, just like Kong is. And then there's more build-up for the final confrontation. It's so well put together, and again, all the scenes with the monsters doing their own individual thing, it builds up greatly to that last fight. And it makes the two monsters feel very personified and unique, unlike what we had in Raids Again, where the two monsters didn't really have, well, especially Anguirus. Godzilla already had a movie, so he had his own thing. But Anguirus didn't really get anything specific about him that made him seem like something separate from Godzilla. Kong has that, and Godzilla has that. So when they fight, it has a lot more weight to it, because they're both these very different, personified, unique monsters. Speaking of that, I also really like the line that's said right before Kong and Godzilla have their first little scuffle, where someone defines the difference between Kong and Godzilla, where they say that Kong is a real animal, whereas Godzilla is a mutation caused by radiation. I really like that line because it sounds like stuff me, Gorzard, and Adam have said to each other in the past about the difference between Kong and Godzilla, so just the Godzilla geek in me got a little grinny at that, so I like that line. And again, it helps the monsters feel more personified. I really like the continuity in this film. Well, most of it. The majority of it is quite good, especially with Godzilla Raids Again. Again, I like where Godzilla is towards the beginning of the film. He's in an iceberg. And I also like how it's brought up that it's the same Godzilla from Raids Again. The Akihito Hirata's character talks about how they knew he wasn't going to be in that iceberg forever, but they were hoping that maybe he would stay in there long enough for us to find a way to kill him. But he basically just talks about how we knew we were going to have to deal with him again someday, and that day is here. So I like that continuity. So I like that. The bad continuity, although again this film is very standalone, so that and all the other events in the film line up pretty well with the Gojira and Raids Again. The problem is the high tension wires, because in Gojira, Godzilla walks through high tension wires with no problem at all. He doesn't even seem thwarted by them. Now, to be fair to this film, this is not the same Godzilla. Again, this is the second Godzilla that we saw in Raids Again, but here's the thing. I don't care if it's a different Godzilla. This film sells Godzilla as Godzilla. So Godzilla is his own unique thing that basically you can wrap up both Godzillas as the same character. Make your arguments if you want, but basically the film sells this Godzilla as the Godzilla, the one we saw in Gojira. So I would expect him to have the same powers and strengths and weaknesses as his ancestor did, as his previous, predecessor did. So I find it disappointing and quite stupid that he is hurt and thwarted by the high tension wires. So that's bad continuity, and it just seems to be there for the sake of giving Godzilla a weakness that's also Kong's strength, just to give Kong some way to one-up Godzilla, who, people in the film even talk about this, how Godzilla just seems so unbeatable and Kong's just a gorilla. So it just seems like to validate Kong, and I don't like that. I don't like making Godzilla weaker just so you can make Kong seem stronger. You shouldn't have to do that. So that'll about do it for the Godzilla continuity stuff. this is a full reboot for Kong, which is interesting because people are very quick to accept the name King Kong. No one even the name isn't even established. It's just like someone just at one point they stop calling him the Monster God, and then when he finally shows up, they just start calling him King Kong, seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, with 33 and with future Kong films, there's a build up to calling him that. So I find that strangely awkward, especially since, again, this is a full reboot for Kong. He's on a different island. The natives are different. The mythology around him is basically non-existent, but it's different. And he's in a totally different section of the Pacific, let me just say. So it's a full reboot for Kong. And I find that interesting because, again, this makes this a Godzilla movie and not a King Kong movie. Yet, strangely, when the film was sold overseas, for the most part, it was sold as a King Kong movie and not as a Godzilla movie. And the big reason for that is because Godzilla wasn't quite the character he is today. And again, he only had 2 movies before this. So it doesn't surprise, and one of them that was sold overseas wasn't even sold as a Godzilla movie. So, you know. So I can see them selling this as a King Kong movie, but ultimately it is a Godzilla movie because this Kong is just here because he has to fight Godzilla. So his continuity is gone. It's just Godzilla's, and Kong is just made a part of it. So not that that's really a criticism or a praise. It's just I'm just making an observation. So this is more of Godzilla's movie than it is Kong's, even though Kong does win in the end. Kong is just worked into Godzilla's continuity rather than the other way around. So I just think I thought I should mention that. The pacing in this film is quite strange and quite bad. The main problem is the human characters, but I'll get to them in a few seconds. But the thing with the pacing is that the scenes are just strangely put together. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but the scenes are just not put together well. I don't know if it's the editing or there's just something off about it. The film doesn't move at a good, smooth pace. And not that I'm saying I want the movie to be fast paced and just, feel like a half hour long. I'm just saying the film doesn't feel evenly paced. Like, it just seems like some scenes drag and some scenes last 2 seconds. The pacing of the Godzilla and Kong stories until they intersect is strange. Godzilla's story seems to be moving at a much slower pace than Kong's. Kong's story is moving very, very fast. I mean, he's heard about, discovered, and brought to Japan in a matter of days. And Godzilla reappears, attacks once, and then goes away for a few days or whatever, and then reappears again over the course of it's just strange, and it doesn't, when you think about it, it doesn't fit together well. I almost wish we didn't see Godzilla until after we introduced Kong. I wish that, I don't know, or maybe Godzilla would have already been around for, maybe the film should have opened a couple years previous, having Godzilla reappear, and then have him attack, I don't know. The film is just strangely put together, and it's a really, really big plot contrivance to get the two together and have them both reappear at the same time, or appear at the same time with Kong. So that's really awkward. The only thing that kind of connects them both appearing at the same time is the TV angle, which we'll talk about when we get to the allegory of the film. So the thing is that they try to connect the Godzilla story and the Kong story by having the news station that the advertising company where Sakai works, following the Seahawk story. And they say something about them sponsoring it, I'm not entirely sure, but they try, it doesn't work, it's still contrived to have the two monsters show up at the same time because there's no connection between what the two things the company is doing at that time. There's no coalition, it's just, oh, we're doing this, but we're also doing this. Again, it's a nice attempt, but they don't follow through with it enough. I think that there should have been something else there to connect the two stories happening at the same time. So that's definitely awkward. So the thing I want to talk about also is the editing. The editing in this film ranges from strange to just, it makes you just shaking your head and what the hell are they doing? Especially the the mixing of music and video. A lot of times the way the film is moving does not match the way the music is moving. I'll get more into this when we talk about Ifukube. But the editing of the film it's strangely cut. I don't know what to say. Maybe it's just me being used to the American version, but this film is just strangely cut. And it feels really awkward at points. Especially the transitions from the Kong story to the Godzilla story. I don't know if they're happening at the same time or not. And there's some kind of flubs, or it's just awkward editing, moving from day to night. It's really hard to tell how many days or nights or weeks this film spans over, because Godzilla starts to move towards a military's trap in what looks like high noon, but doesn't arrive at that trap until it can't be like 7 o'clock at night. What? It's just awkward. And in the American version, they even say that he's further away than he clearly is. So at least in the American version, they try to make it seem less awkward, but in this film, it seems like Godzilla's moving at a snail's pace. So, it's just so weird and awkward. And again, there's no line to support why it took him so long to get there. There's also one other really awkward cut of Kong running around a Tokyo suburb. And again, it looks like the morning, and then he arrives there at night, or dusk, I guess. Oh, it's weird. And again, it's just... I think it's just the editing team having a hard time, or maybe even the scriptwriter. I think this is written by Shinkichi Sekizawa. I might be wrong on that. I think this is Sekizawa's first Godzilla movie. Him and the editing team seem to have a really hard time, again, running the two stories at once until they collide. And they seem to have a really hard time getting certain things to happen at the same time and making them not seem awkward. So the film is definitely awkward for that. Otherwise, it's pretty good. The editing, it's strange, but it works at points. So the editing doesn't make the film unwatchable, it just makes it awkward. So let's move on to the allegory/satire. Oh my god, this movie is so infamous for this. This is just very specific to the Japanese version. The American version, this is the big thing that's cut out of the American version, and thank God for it. We'll get to that in the next review. But in the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla, the main allegory/satire/social commentary in the film is the idea of commercialism and criticizing it. Or maybe not criticizing, but just making fun of it. Mainly TV advertising and the way TV works. The main characters in the film are all work for this advertising company, and basically they're all I don't know what to call them. They're basically advertisers, and they seem to be very much so at the they very much so seem to be grabbed by the throat by consumers and the culture, and they really don't like that, and it makes Sakurai a really bitter man. And I like that angle, but and I also like how crazy and tooth and nail the head of the advertising company is, Tako. He's ultimately too silly for his own good. But I like that he's so crazy that there's a point where Godzilla's causings of destruction is all over the news, and he's going out looking for King Kong, and he's made angry by this, and I'm just like, and it's a good thing, not a bad thing, but it's a good thing that he's so crazy, because it does work to the film's advantage of satire, and that he's so crazy over advertising and being the best that he doesn't like that Godzilla is stealing all his press over his giant monster. So, and then it's also really funny where they find Kong and all the press is on him. So that's funny and definitely works for that angle. So I like that all the characters seem to be at the throat of commercialism. So it's definitely not a criticism, but a commentary on it. And Honda and Sekizawa definitely know what they're going after, and they do try their best to support their idea of criticizing commercialism and casting it in a satirical light. Here's the problem with it. It's out of place, as all hell. Why would you put that in a movie called King Kong vs. Godzilla? Now, when I first heard about the commercialism angle, again, this was the first time I ever saw the film in full, I was interested because I thought it was going to be in a way of here are these two big monstrous film icons. It's a really commercial kind of thing to have them fight together. I thought that's what they were going to go for. That's not what they went for at all. The Godzilla and Kong story is taken completely seriously. Everything else in the film is goofy satire. It doesn't work at all. And it makes the film so hard to watch and take seriously because this is Honda. And this is a guy who made a film with Gojira that was one of the most serious and depressing pieces of cinema I've ever seen. Then he makes this, which is like so goofy and uses the same character, and it doesn't fit with what this movie should have been. This should have been just an epic sci-fi story, and the American version tries to turn it into that as much as possible, but the Japanese cut is way too goofy for its own good, and it's not unwatchable, but it makes the film difficult to sit through if you're looking for a serious Godzilla film, since it really doesn't take itself too seriously. And all the human characters are so cartoony. Even Sakurai, who I like, but he's just so goofy. And like some of his facial expressions and the thing he says, they sound like they're from a really, I don't want to say bad, but really cheesy, like a goofball comedy kind of thing. And it just doesn't work for Godzilla. And also, I can't believe Honda directed this. It doesn't show at all. Again, this is the master of allegory, but he does dark allegory. Or at least allegory that takes itself seriously, and King Kong vs. Godzilla doesn't at all. Again, it's not so much an allegory as satire, and it just doesn't work for the tone. And the theme is just, it's basically completely gone by the time the monsters start to take stage about halfway through the film. It's just completely gone. And it's only mentioned briefly sometimes, and again, we don't really get a grasp of what the hell Honda and Sekizawa are trying to say with it. Like, it just seems to be there just to make the film seem more important. Just like that last line, which is even further out of the film's thematic sense. It just comes out of nowhere. At least the commercialism angle is slightly developed, but again, it just doesn't work for being a Godzilla movie. So I talked about Sakurai a little bit. Let's talk about the human cast in general, though. They're all basically cartoon characters. Well, the main cast are all cartoon characters. All the military people are fine, but are good actors, like, Akihiko Hirata. There's the general in this film. He's going to become a major Godzilla player, especially in War of the Gargantuas and later Godzilla films. So he's cool and important there. But all the other characters are basically cartoon characters. Sakurai is your typical pissed-off, blue-collar working guy. His friend, whose name escapes me, not Fumi's fiance, because he's not too cartoony. But Sakurai's best friend, who works with him at the advertising agency, is really just like a typical scaredy-cat sidekick. Their translatory guide, Kono, is really, really goofy. When he gets on the island, he sticks up his hands in like a I surrender kind of pose and doesn't put them down for that whole day. Which is funny, but again, it's a King Kong versus Godzilla. This is King Kong versus Godzilla. This should not be this goofy. And ultimately, they're amusing characters. Sakurai is the only one I would call likable, but they're really amusing characters. But they're so unrelatable because of how goofy they are. Like, you don't connect with any of them. Again, the only one I connected with was Sakurai because he's this working-class, blue-collar guy who has the hands of commercialism on his throat to do whatever it wants. I really like that, but he's the only one I find sympathetic and relatable and likable. Everyone else is just so goofy that they're unrelatable. But again, they're amusing. So if you're looking for a Godzilla movie with a serious human cast who takes the scenario seriously, avoid this movie like the plague. And I hate to say that because maybe it's just because I was raised on this movie that I don't mind so much, but I think if you're someone who likes a darker Godzilla and that's all you like, this movie's not going to work for you. And some of the Showa films we're going to get to a little later are going to be that way too. But this was the thing that introduced me to it, and I was exposed to both tones for Godzilla, so I didn't mind so much. So that's really the human cast. Again, they're so goofy, they're unrelatable. So that's definitely a problem, and it makes the film difficult to watch. So now let's talk about my favorite aspect of King Kong vs. Godzilla, the effects and the monsters. Ooh, they're awesome. Sabraya is at his best here. This is some really fantastic stuff. I think that Sabraya was really disappointed with the way Raids Again looked. So I think he basically begged Honda and Toho to give him more time and money to do this. And it shows. He is just having a ball with this movie and makes everything look great. Godzilla looks fantastic. All the military fight scenes and the monster fight scenes look fantastic. And they're very elaborate. And the live action human footage and the Godzilla and the monster footage really come together seamlessly in a way that you don't get with all Godzilla films. Like, the human characters and the monsters feel in the same plane of reality in this movie. So my hat's off to Sabraya for that. That last fight scene, oh my god, it's so cool. I'm gonna get more into the details in it in a few minutes. But it looks so convincing. And again, Sabraya is at his best. And for 1962, this stuff is really. It's definitely, I don't want to say upgrade, but you can definitely tell Sabraya has been doing some playing around with the suitimation thing. He's made a lot of monster movies at this point, so he knows what to do. And he knows what you can show and what you can't, and how we can progress the field of suitimation to make everything look great. And this movie just looks amazing. Godzilla's new roar, well, we'll get to Ifukube in a second, so we'll talk about Godzilla's new roar in a minute, but just the effects are great. So let's talk about the suits themselves. I don't think it's a mystery at this point that this is my favorite Godzilla suit, the 62 Kingoji suit. This Godzilla is just awesome looking. He retains the massiveness of the original Gojira design, but the head is new and looks a little bit more dinosaurian, and the eyes are a little bit more reptilian. And it doesn't look more realistic to me, but it looks a little bit more perhaps personified. Because again, Gojira had that whole unemotional destroyer thing going. This Godzilla doesn't really have that. And that's not a problem because it makes Godzilla feel more like a character. And again, that's not to Gojira's discredit, because that worked for that Godzilla. And this works for this Godzilla, who has to do some more, has to have some more human emotions. And this suit works for that. But again, it just looks really cool. The spines look great. The head is probably my favorite part of it. The claws are a little awkward, and the way they're positioned doesn't look like Godzilla has much mobility like he does have in the previous two films, but it still works for me. Ultimately, he doesn't look as flexible as he'll look in the future. But I love this suit. I wish it was used again in an actual it's the main suit, because it'll be used again in the next film, but only in the water scenes. So I love this suit and wish it was used more. Kong looks terrible. It's just, Sabraya originally had a design for the thing that looked a lot more like a real gorilla, but he just couldn't get a guy to fit inside that costume. So he ultimately had to sacrifice it looking like a real gorilla for making it possible to put it on screen. And I commend him for at least trying to make Kong look like a gorilla initially, but again, it doesn't look anything like a gorilla. And it doesn't really work as a King Kong design. It looks nothing like the original 1933 Kong. He doesn't walk on all fours. He walks on two legs all the time. The head looks terrible. Just the body looks like a rubber suit. It just doesn't work at all. And at points, they cut between the actual suit head and using this weird puppet, almost animatronic kind of head with a moving mouth and moving eyes. And it looks so fake and doesn't match at all with the suit. It just does not work. And also, it looks like Kong has blank eyes in the scenes where it's the suit, but in the scenes where it's that head, he has like actual eyes, and it just looks weird. Also, the jaw doesn't align between the two heads, so it looks weird. And it doesn't look anything like King Kong or a gorilla. So it just doesn't work in that regard. It looks terrible. I wish that they would have done something different with it. The last thing about the effects I want to talk about is probably the film's most famous scene outside of the Godzilla and Kong scenes, the octopus battle scene. For the production of Pirates of the Caribbean 2, the directors and effects team actually made the entire cast and crew watch this scene from King Kong vs. Godzilla, where Kong fights the octopus, because it was so elaborate, and they wanted to get some inspiration for their scene with the Kraken, because that's what they wanted to go for. And it definitely shows, because this scene is incredible, because it's not stop motion or a suit. It's an actual octopus that they made to look in scale with the miniatures, and it just looks so great. And its fight with Kong is not the greatest thing ever, but it's just so impressive that you don't care. In fact, American producers were so impressed with the scene that they actually forced Toho to film a scene in Frankenstein Conquers the World where the Frankenstein monster fights a giant octopus. And again, it comes out of nowhere in that film, but this scene definitely had that kind of impact, and it's a great scene. And Gyra in the World of Gargantuas has a scene where he fights a giant octopus as well, so this scene made an impact. And the octopus does come out of nowhere and is a weird thing to have attack, but it looks so damn cool that you don't care. It's just a really cool-ass effect. It really convinces this as a giant octopus. And its fight with Kong is interesting if very short-lived. So it's a really impressive scene, and it's easily some of Sabraya's most unique work. So Sabraya's angle in this is some of his best work. I think it looks fantastic. And the Toho scope definitely complements the way the film looks. It just looks gorgeous. And the widescreen ratio looks fantastic with the monster battle scenes, because it makes them look bigger. And that was what they were going for with this fight. This is kind of the battle of the century kind of thing. So Toho scope definitely works for that. And again, the film just looks beautiful. Also, the color tone works well. So, and the more colorful palette that we didn't have in Gojira and Godzilla Raids Again works better for this somewhat silly and kind of more sci-fi Godzilla material. So I like the color palette, and I like the Toho scope. Let's talk about Godzilla himself. He doesn't get too much advancement quite yet. He's definitely got some different characteristics in this film. I already talked about the look, but let's talk about his characterization. This is where Godzilla starts to become very humanized and stops being that destructive force of nature and is more of a badass monster. And unlike Raids Again, he definitely feels like Godzilla and not just another giant monster. Like, he definitely feels like his own unique thing. That's partially because I think he has more screen time in this, and ultimately he makes more of an impact on the people of the world. And again, that's just the way Honda is. Honda's a master with making Godzilla feel like Godzilla, so whenever he's directing, Godzilla always has a great characterization of just being a badass. So, you know, having him back definitely helps that, whereas the other director for Raids Again didn't quite know how to do that. So having Honda back was definitely a plus to Godzilla. He has a really unique badass feel that he'll get for a couple more films in the Showa series, and it's something different that we won't get later. And not to say that the later stuff is bad, it's just not this. I really like this Godzilla. This, through Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monsters, has a specific characterization that I can't quite describe. He's basically just a no-nonsense badass that does his own thing and doesn't need to have reasons for doing it. He just seems to be the same Godzilla from Gojira, just with a unique personality and not quite that unemotional force of nature. He is very much so destructive, but he's not quite a force of nature anymore. He is now kind of a character, and a very angry one. And that's another thing I get from this Godzilla's look. He seems very angry, and again, that really works great. And ultimately, this will spawn my favorite Godzilla characterization of that personified, angry, destructive badass that Honda will so beautifully bring to the screen. So we'll have that for a couple movies, but then it'll start to get diluted. But for now, until we get to Ghidorah, he's got that characterization, and I love it. He's kind of an not really an anti-hero, he's still a villain, but he's not quite the same kind of tragic villain. Now he's just kind of a destructive monster but still, I can't quite put my finger on it. He's definitely unique, but he's not as revenge-driven or tragic as Gojira. So, that's more of an observation than a critique or a praise, but I love this Godzilla characterization. So, I think that's basically all I wanted to cover. Oh no, there's one last thing I wanted to cover about Godzilla's characterization, and this goes for Kong as well, but this is Godzilla Palooza, so we'll mainly be talking about him. In that, this is the first time Godzilla gets some human emotions outside of revenge, like we have with Gojira and kind of with Raids Again. With King Kong vs. Godzilla, he shows frustration, confusion, and kind of, some thinking skills. He has to get a little bit creative when he's fighting Kong, because Kong's a really smart gorilla who, has tactics that something like Anguirus could never employ, like, tricking Godzilla. So seeing Godzilla use rocks and burying Kong is definitely really, it's really cool, and again, it humanizes Godzilla a little bit. Though that does sacrifice being able to take him seriously, which I don't like. One thing that this film has a problem with that Mothra vs. Godzilla through Ghidorah doesn't is taking Godzilla seriously after we see him do things like get his tail grabbed and him thrown, and then looking really pissed off and confused after that. And the monster fight scene at the end is spectacular, but definitely goofy. Seeing Kong throwing a rock at Godzilla and then Godzilla getting all pissed off about it, it makes it more harder to take that fight as a seriously as a legit monster battle. So I don't love that. Although I do really like that ending fight scene. And seeing Godzilla confused is cool, but it hurts being able to take him seriously. But whatever. You can kind of take it or leave it, whatever your perspective may be. Again, it just depends on what kind of Godzilla fan you are. I think if you appreciate the older stuff, but still love the Dark Godzilla, I think that this characterization will work for you and make sense in what we're going to get later. But if you're just like the Dark stuff and you really don't have any love or appreciation for the Showa series, one, shame on you. Two, this isn't going to work for you too well. So that'll about do it for this review of the Japanese cut. Before I go to ratings, I'll just say that this film I definitely recommend you watch. Just based on the premise and alone and the build up to the fight, if you can somehow see the original Japanese version, I do recommend it. Just on the grounds of it's different enough from the American version where I say you should watch both. The plot structure is similar, but their editing is different enough, and this film has a bigger widescreen aspect ratio where it looks better. So I recommend it for that, and also for one of the greatest Godzilla fight scenes ever. So, also for one of the most unique stories ever. We won't get something like this again. So I do recommend you watch it for that. And ultimately, if you're showing Godzilla to your family, or you're just trying to watch it, don't skip this one. It may be goofy, but it's cool, and definitely will set the standards for the rest of the Showa series. It's so classic that you have to see it. It's the birth of the kaiju monster battle. What's not to like? Sure, Raids Again had a monster battle in it, but let's just pretend that didn't happen. This is the classic structure. This is a very good movie. It's goofy, but I love it still. If you have an appreciation for the not quite as dark Showa Godzilla films, this is a great movie, and ultimately does, in the end, overcome all of its faults with editing. And one last thing to say about this movie before I give it a rating. The music in this film by Akira Ifukube, I totally missed this. I had it written down and it got lost in this list. I apologize for the disorganization here. I really tried my best to make this organized. So before we go to the rating, let me talk about the music of this movie. This is not even kind of Ifukube's best work. His best work is yet to... Well, no, Gojira is his best work, but some of his most classic Godzilla scores is yet to come. And this film has a very basic Godzilla soundtrack feel, but like it almost feels like he knew the sound of he knew the sound he wanted to bring to future Godzilla films, but he didn't quite know where to put it. Like this film, the music doesn't really connect well with the actual movie. Like some of the scenes having music or lack thereof are really awkward, and the music doesn't fit the scene. So shame on Ifukube for that. I mean, the music is ultimately really quite good, but it doesn't fit the movie and is a very basic Godzilla-sounding score. Though this is the birth of a lot of the most classic Godzilla themes. Gojira had them in it, but this is more of the versions of them we're going to get later. So it feels a little bit like an experiment that didn't quite go as planned. So I do ultimately begrudge the film for misusing Ifukube's epicness, I'm going to say, because the music doesn't match the movie. And ultimately, I'm going to go this far. The music in the American version matches what's going on screen better than this movie does, but we'll get to that in a few minutes when we review the English cut. So I'm going to say that with King Kong vs. Godzilla. The music doesn't quite match the movie. So this is easily not Ifukube's best work, or even some of his better work. It's just okay, and it will ultimately be the basis for future Godzilla soundtracks. We'll get a really awesome Ifukube soundtrack in the next movie, so just you folks wait. So sorry for that misuse of organization. So now we're going to actually go to the rating. So again, I do recommend this movie, though. It has a lot of faults it has to overcome. So I'm going to give this movie a 4 out of 5. I know a lot of you aren't going to agree, but I do love this movie and do highly recommend you check it out if you're a Godzilla fan, or if you're just looking for a really classic kaiju movie that is kind of the quintessential, this made kaiju movies popular kind of movie. So it's important historically in the history of monster movies, so you have to see it for that, but also it's just a really entertaining movie. The allegory doesn't work for sure, and it's not ultimately a film that changes your perspective on the world, but you know, it's King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's a classic. You have to see it. Don't skip it. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. So that'll do it for reviewing the Japanese cut, but we're not done with King Kong vs. Godzilla just yet. We still have to review the imported American cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla, which is the only cut us in America can get legally. So stay tuned for part 2 of day 4 of Godzilla Palooza, where we'll be reviewing the American cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla. So follow me over to that. Thank you very much for watching this review. Zazubaar out.